You're talking so a lot about Ukraine and how you love us, but do you miss home?
I don't.
Caolan, welcome. You know, it's time for us to talk not just about politics, but to show people some more private side of us as a journalist and TV anchors. So let's just go to the point, straight to the point. This weekend, you hosted and served amazing dinner for your friends, cooking borsch, Ukrainian national dish. Where did you learn it and why borsch?
I feel like I learned to make borscht back when I was a kid in Ireland. It's very similar to Irish cooking. It's agricultural. It's from root vegetables from the earth. It's very homely. It takes a lot of care. That's how my grandmother always used to cook with me in the kitchen. That's where I learned to cook since I was a kid. And it's always about throwing whatever you have, whatever the harvest is, whatever the weather is, into one pot and just putting love into it over hours. And I think that's when I first learned to make borscht. But I never knew borscht was borscht until I came to Ukraine. But I had that memory of making food in the same way. And I guess it came from there. Because when I started to research it, I was like, okay, I need to get the exact recipe. How exactly is it made? How many tomatoes? How many this? And then I started to realize that there is not one way to do it. And I remember reading recipes from Ukrainians saying when they go on a date, one of the things they'll do as a test is ask their potential partner to cook them borscht, and then they'll see how it is, how sweet it is, and if that'll make them a good candidate. And I was like, wow, there's so much more to this. And then there's the green borscht, which goes back like God knows how long, over 1,000 years. And what I loved about it was realizing that there's no one way to do it, and that it's adapted for hundreds of years, but it's still alive, so strong, which is kind of like Ukraine in a dish. It's kind of amazing. And then I started...
Ukraine in a dish. Wow.
It's something that can be adaptive, that can be modified and molded and changes over time, but it always still has its soul, which is the love that goes into it. And
yeah, borscht is very rich and flavor, to be honest. And your version is quite unique. I was lucky to try it.
Well, yeah, I wasn't sure how... I mean, I love experimenting with food. I think it's so fun to do that. And apparently that's what you do with borscht, whether it's how much sweetness or not. But my partner loves food with lots of spices from Southeast Asia. And you love Indian as well. You were telling me, you were like, my favorite food is Indian food and borscht.
Yeah, Ukrainian one. And you just combine two in one dish. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and when I first made it, I thought this could do with some cumin. This could definitely, like, I could sort of imagining kind of like the earthy, Pakistani, Indian spices actually going really well with this, because Ukrainian food anyway is pretty diverse, right? A lot of people think of food in the east of Europe as just like quite bland, or, you know, all the same, or it's all very kind of dry. I mean, this is like a stereotype that so many people have in Western Europe of a place like Ukraine. But it's already very diverse, you know, with Crimean food, with Georgian mixes, with Greek, with so much sushi in Odesa. So I thought, well, this is the perfect place to experiment. So yeah, I mixed with sort of coriander, garam masala, tandoori masalas. But it is a dish that's very soft, right? And so I wanted to have a bit of a crunch to it. So I roasted chickpeas that had been coated in coconut oil and garam masala, and had them on the top with some crispy bacon just to give it like a bite at the top. And it was so fun to experiment with that. But you were the first person to try it. So what did you rate it?
Well, as I told you, I like all this spiciness in the food, and as hotter is better. So, and this crunchy thing, and sour cream on top, and you served it with salad. So for me, everything was great. I mean, this is just a perfect dish for me. So, I don't know, I'm a very foodie person. So, but still, you surprised me. So your experiment, I would say, was successful.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yes, you know, I was thinking that for many people, cooking is a routine. For some, it's a meditation. What is cooking for you, for Caolan Robertson?
I would say it's a meditation. I cook to switch off. Whenever I used to cook really big dinners when I lived in London for all my friends, Sometimes they would come over and say, you need a night off. This is supposed to be exhausting. Let us take care of the preparation. And I was like, this is my night off. This is my time to relax. There's nothing better than just going into a beautiful empty island in a kitchen, getting everything you need and just putting it all together into something great. And then the best moment is serving it to people and just watching people enjoy something you've created. I think one of the best gifts that you can give to someone is the gift of food and that experience of just enjoyment, all of your senses, the smells, the tastes. It's an amazing thing to be able to give to someone, and it makes me super fulfilled to cook for people because I love people enjoying my food. It just feels like the point of life, you know?
And I'm a happy part of that experience.
Good.
You cooking for other people. Okay, yeah, we're a perfect match. I'm a foodie person, you like to cook, and it's a great to be a friend. Yeah, I just, we're talking, as long as we're talking about Ukraine and Ukrainian food, I still wanted to ask you, and I never did. You're talking so a lot about Ukraine and how you love us, but do you miss home?
I don't. And it's strange because I thought I would, because I loved where I lived before Ukraine. I loved London. I had a beautiful house in Chelsea, which is a really lovely neighborhood in London, fresh green stores everywhere. I had a great job and so many friends. Every day after I'd finished shooting films or shooting at the studio, I'd go out to London Bridge and go to the markets and enjoy a night out on the town. It was amazing, but I never missed any of it, even for a day as soon as I got here, because something always felt deep down like home was here. And I always felt like I was missing something in London, and I don't know what it was. Even though I was there for 10 years and had a great life, the second I crossed the border into Ukraine, I genuinely felt something strange in the air. Literally in the way that I was breathing, I could feel something. I felt like I was returning somewhere instead of arriving somewhere. And when I did some research, and Odesa is the place I love the most, I remember when I first got there and I heard the sounds of the waves crashing across the shore on the Black Sea and feeling inner peace like I've never felt in my life. And started researching where my great-grandparents are from. Both my parents are adopted, which is a really unusual thing, but adopted people find each other across Earth. I don't know how psychologists talk about it. Sometimes it gives people a sense of abandonment, so they find each other. And so a lot of adopted people marry adopted people and find adopted people.
They have the same trauma.
Yeah. So we did lots of research and found that my great-grandparents are buried north of Odesa. And everything started to make sense when I found this out. And they were part of the Black Sea Germans, which is it's like a tribe back in the 1800s. They were expelled by the Soviets and they had these terribly traumatic times. But I found a letter from my great-grandmother to her daughter, who had gone missing for a long time in all of this turbulence and all of these problems, longing to see her again. And longing to wish and find out what happened to her. And it was really, really beautifully written. I'll find a piece of it for this and overlay it. And the way in that letter that she spoke about Ukraine and spoke about longing and spoke about belonging there is exactly how I felt. And it's really strange. So maybe that's why I never felt like I missed home, because it was always here. And I think there's a really strange part of it where it's like, it's almost like whenever I'm telling stories here, it's the continuation of a really long journey that started hundreds of years ago. And it just, another chapter of it was 2023 when I first arrived, you know. It's strange, but no, I've never missed home since the day I arrived.
Then my follow-up, you mentioned that you had a lot of friends there. But now you're in a process, I would say, to create your own circle of friends here. What do you like about Ukrainian people and your new friends, and what is the most difficult for you?
What I love the most is the fact that the friends that I've made here have become friends immediately within seconds of meeting Ukrainians, especially in Odesa and Kyiv. People who, actually everywhere really, people who I just click with in a way I never really did back home. And I think that's because, and I've spoken about this a bit in the past, there's a lot of misconceptions that maybe countries like Ukraine might be quite stereotypical or quite old-fashioned in their views or quite judgmental or quite discriminatory. But what I found was people here judge you immediately based on face value. And Ukrainians don't form an opinion of someone unless they've seen them and looked at them and said, okay, I'm going to decide. What's your sense of humor? Are you smiling? Are you in a good mood? What is your... They'll just judge based on what they see in the first few seconds. And I think that's the best way to live your life, to have a vibration with someone. That's kind of how we connected the first time as well. And that's what I really loved about making friends with good people everywhere. The people that I've met in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's how we connected for the first time when you forgot that you have an interview with me.
The second time. No, but we hadn't met physically yet.
Yeah,
so.
Okay.
But people here, when you, Ukrainians can, I feel like the friends that I've made here, Ukrainians are very, at first maybe a little closed off with new people that they meet and protective. And then once they realize that you've got good intentions and you're someone here for the right reasons, then they'll open up and become the best friends you could possibly have, the most open and free and just warm people. And it's really, really amazing. It's very similar to Ireland. In Ireland, growing up, you know, you'd have someone walking down the street and they might look a little bit grumpy and they might look a little bit like closed off. And then you'll ask your friends, oh, I wonder what's up with them. And they'll be like, oh, they're just Irish. But actually, she's the sweetest woman in the whole town. She's the greatest person in the whole town. And there is a weird comparison where Irish people are a little bit closed, and then the second they realize you're a good person, they invite you into their lives and you'll have the best time. You can go to an Irish pub in the middle of nowhere in the West Coast, open the door on a rainy night, and it'll be full of people who haven't left the village in 100 years, and they'll all go really quiet for a second, and they'll be like, ooh, who's that? And then 15 minutes later, you'll be dancing on the tables with everyone and singing Irish music and playing guitars by the fire, and that's how it is. And so I feel like it's so similar to where I grew up. In friendships, the hardest part is that I don't speak Ukrainian yet. And I've never learned another language in my life. I failed every time at school, German, French, Irish, couldn't do it. I don't know what it is, my brain just doesn't know how to do it.
Do you have a plan to learn Ukrainian? Do you have an intention to learn Ukrainian, to be honest?
I think I told you on New Year's Eve that this year I'm going to do several things. One of those things is I'm going to end it speaking Ukrainian really well because I'm missing out. I feel like I'm missing out on so much. Now that my life is fully here, so many jokes, so many moments, just so many great conversations.
Absolutely. You're missing the opportunity to understand how funny I am. in my own Ukrainian language.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
No, I'm having... I do have a very sharp mind. I hope.
I'm going to learn. I need to figure out how to do it. There's a very annoying thing with learning things in Ukraine, and that's that there's a mindset with teachers and doctors and people with positions of authority that is a little old school, and it's like, this is how you learn something and there's no maneuverability. When I've been to the doctors before in the past, sometimes I get prescribed medication and I ask what it is and they'll go, oh, you don't need to know what that is, just take it. And I'll go, well, no, I don't know, I think, and it comes from this, you know, the teacher is the head of everything. And it's the same with the language classes that I've had here in Kyiv, because I've tried, where I'll go, okay, they'll go, right, you have to learn the alphabet first, and then you have to work backwards from here. And then once you know these words, then we can move on to speaking. And I was like, I can't learn to read because this isn't going to work. I just need to be able to have conversations. And they were like, well, it's impossible. We can't possibly change the curriculum. It's like the most insane thing ever. We can't do it. So I was like, right, okay, I'll have to figure out a completely different route. So I don't know. I'll think of some ideas of how to do it. Maybe like a tutor who's a little bit more.
Knowing you quite well at this point, you will get to the point of knowing Ukrainian. Speaking Ukrainian, definitely.
This year as well. It will happen this year. I don't want to wait another year as well.
Step by step, but knowing some, important phrases, words. Yeah. You know, as you mentioned that you somehow knew how to cook borscht when you were a kid. I was thinking, when was the first time you find out about Ukraine?
I didn't know where Ukraine was on a map, even into my adult life. And I wasn't very good at geography, but I just wasn't aware of Ukraine as a country. Growing up in Ireland, Ukraine isn't part of Irish, curriculum. It's not part of history when you're learning at school, really. It's very focused on Ireland, and in Britain it's very focused on, even in history, World War II, it's France, it's Germany, it's Britain. Ukraine isn't part of the education system. But also just in my awareness, I had heard of Donbass in 2014 when Russia were doing what they were doing and annexing Crimea. But I'd also read Russian propaganda back then, that it was Russians and Ukrainians who were the same kind of culture fighting over an abstract place, which is what so many millions of people unfortunately still think about Ukraine. But I had no idea, right up until the full-scale invasion. At that moment, and I couldn't believe it, still in the news, that this had happened again in Europe, that's when I started really researching, typing into Google what Kyiv looked like, what Lviv looked like, what Ukraine looked like. And before the full-scale invasion, I had no idea. And sometimes people say that to me and they go, oh, you don't really like Ukraine that much. You didn't know anything about it before the full-scale invasion. And I admit I didn't. And that's a huge shame. I wish I knew before. And my life would have been probably far more interesting and amazing if I could have come here and seen Kyiv before curfew and seen Kyiv before. But that's just one of the great shames of my life, is I never realized what Ukraine was before Russia arrived, before that COVID, because it's already amazing here, living here. And that's with all the destruction and chaos that Russia's brought. I can't imagine how it was when it was free, when people could gather and celebrate and have fireworks on New Year's Eve and Christmas and do everything the way that they should be able to do, and farm in their own lands without mines in the ground, and do all the things that I see, you know, when I watch videos of Kherson before the full-scale invasion, or all of these different amazing places that are now under occupation south of the river. My biggest regret is not knowing about Ukraine and not visiting those places before the full-scale invasion, because they looked magical, completely magical.
Recently you told me this is the nostalgia about the places you have never visited?
Yeah, that was a word that kept coming to mind. I felt a burning nostalgia, still do, for a place I've never been. I mean, maybe I've been in another universe, you know, again with my great-grandparents buried here, but when I watch videos of Crimea and of the places Ukrainians used to go every single year for healing, for energy, for visiting family, they looked like, I mean, I even feel goosebumps talking about it. Crimea looked like Troy. It looked like places you would only read about in mythology, in deep history of thousands of years ago, of great, beautiful empires and geography that's just indescribable. Magical places. And that makes me nostalgic that I haven't been. I know one day I think it's possible to go when all this is over, but it's a strange feeling. And that's why I spend so much time traveling in Ukraine, right? To Carpathians and to Odesa, because what is left is still amazing and still beautiful. But I mean, I met a couple recently, a Ukrainian couple who have just released a book, and in the book is 100 different pages of all the different beautiful places in Ukraine. And I've got it at home now and I'll show it to you later, but each page is just somewhere where they visited and flew a drone over and filmed. And it's so stunning that I think it's what makes me so emotionally attached as well to not just reporting here, but reporting the victory when it comes. I'm emotionally invested to Ukraine winning, because I want to see those places for myself and go there and enjoy years there and see the places that so many of my friends talk about with joy in their eyes. I think it would be incredible.
While I was preparing, I was talking with my colleagues, and we was thinking that probably you didn't know that Rihanna, Beyonce, they were in Donetsk before the annexation of Russia. And could you imagine how amazing those places were?
I only realized this when I started doing research about Kramatorsk and I watched the performances in Donetsk stadium. Or is it Donbass Stadium? Donetsk Stadium.
Yes.
The arena.
Yeah,
that's
the
now
arena.
overgrown and dilapidated, and it's just so sad given how much joy was given in that stadium. But every single time I go to a place in Ukraine, I always look at the history immediately, not just the last 100 years, but the deep, deep history. And it's really difficult to watch that and have to report that because of what's being lost. But yeah, I mean, it was, Donetsk looked amazing. I mean, when I was first in Bakhmut, the outskirts of Bakhmut in 2023, obviously this entire region is gone now, this whole area. I remember, and it was really heavily damaged and almost destroyed. I remember asking the fixer I was with to show me a photo of Bakhmut just before the Russians arrived. And it was full of red roses, the whole city. And I was like, why is it full of red roses? And they were like, well, that's just what Bakhmut was like. It was just the red rose city. And I was like, why have I never seen this before? Every single town I seem to go to has some sort of thing like that.
Yeah,
like a color or a vegetable that grows or a fruit or a story or or salt under the hills that stores wine perfectly, or silt that makes beautiful porcelain. There's always something, which is bizarre, because if you go around the UK, you know, it's not the same. If you travel around Europe, a lot of villages are just villages, you know, and they're just a village, and they always have been. Maybe a village is there because it used to do fishing 50 years ago, but not here. Everything is connected to something so much more meaningful. It's why at Christmas I made the video about Carol of the Bells, the Ukrainian song, at the train station here. Because even Pokrovsk, which is known just as a railway hub to outsiders, was the home of music that we hear all across the world at the most special time of year, at Christmas, sung by the railway workers 100 years ago in Pokrovsk. And there's nothing like it. And I think that's why I go as well and try to capture as much as possible. A, before some of these places are gone. Not gone forever, but gone for now. But B, to show people what's being lost and how amazing this is. This is like, it's like when you find out about the coolest place that's just opened in town, and you have to just tell all your friends about it, and you have to tell everyone the most amazing time that you had there. That's why I include it in my reporting. I'm like, by the way, the war is horrible, this is what's happening, but this is one of the best places in the world as well. And I just feel like completely compelled to tell it and to show it in every way possible. And it's hard because if that was my only reporting, people would say there's no war. People would say, Russians would use it as propaganda and say, well, people are still living their lives. Ukraine is still beautiful. So, you know, clearly they don't need any aid. Clearly our tax money is being wasted. But I always have to remind people that this is in spite of what Russia's doing. It's in spite of the war. And it makes it even more profound. But, you know, it's, I just wish I saw things before 2022. That's my biggest regret in life. Because I was wandering around the streets of London doing good work. But I would have much rather been wandering around here.
Speaking about your reporting, you have a different audience in Ukraine. And recently you made an exclusive interview with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And the feedback and the reaction from your audience, the new audience that came to your podcast and your YouTube channel, was quite unusual, because some of them were supporting you and some of them were saying that you were not asking him the right questions. And the right one meaning corruption and TCR, yes, right? TCR. Yep. So what was your reaction on that? How was you processing that comments from people?
The reason that I've come to Ukraine isn't to tell Ukrainians what is going on in their own country, isn't to report here for Ukraine. It's to tell people around the world what is happening here, who don't understand, who don't know the war is still going on, who don't know what Russia's doing, who believe Russian propaganda. That's my entire focus. So local politics that happen here, inner disputes, corruption, things like that, this is for Ukrainian journalists to investigate, and lots of them do, and that's great. My job here is to show what Russia is doing and show the culture of Ukraine surviving, and I've set that out from the outset. It was a weird thing being given an opportunity to speak to the president. I really didn't expect it in a lot of ways. But what I love to do is to ask people questions that they don't get asked very often. Zelensky gets asked about corruption every single time by right-wing media. He's been asked this stuff a million times. It's been done before. What I wanted to ask was how he is as a human being behind the curtain of politics, not as a politician, not as a president, but as a human who's been fighting this for so long. That's what my reporting is about in Ukraine. It's not about the number of missiles that get launched every day. It's not about internal Ukrainian politics. It's about survival and how people are coping here and how the country is surviving despite everything, how it's holding back the horde of Russia for the rest of us in Europe. And so that is that. The second part to it is, my audience are not Ukrainian. I have 1.2 million subscribers now. They are Americans, they're Australians, they're people who don't know much about Ukraine, and in a lot of ways maybe don't care much more about Ukraine because their attention spans have drifted. I think if I started focusing here on internal Ukrainian issues, whether it's draft issues, whether it's corruption issues, whatever this is going to be used as the Russians, as propaganda, and it's not something it's already stuff that's been reported. So I don't think it's very helpful. And I think that, you know, if you are Ukrainian and you're annoyed that I didn't ask Zelensky these questions, I think it's better to focus that energy on Ukrainian journalists because that's their job. I just don't see how it's going to help. anything to do with Ukraine. And again, I'm not an activist here, I'm a journalist here, and that's why I push. When Pokrovsk fell, I asked the commander in that region whether it was logistics problems, whether it was high command, there were failed operations. I have asked those tough questions in this country many, many, many times. But asking Zelensky about corruption over and over and over again is a complete waste of my time. So, and also, you know, of course there's problems with corruption in Ukraine. But the fact that I can sit here and talk about it, the fact that you can talk about it, and most people can talk about it, when Ukraine's getting called a dictatorship every 2 seconds by the United States government, is the real story of how ridiculous things really are. In a dictatorship, that none of this would be happening. In a dictatorship, I wouldn't be allowed to sit there and sit there without a script. No. But look, corruption is, if you want to look where real corruption is, of course there's versions of it here. At least Ukraine is dealing with it. Honestly, in the United States, corruption's getting worse every single day. In Britain, we've got corruption on a daily basis. We certainly did under the Conservative government. At least in Ukraine, it's actually getting dealt with. People are being fired. Cabinets are being reshuffled. It's not fixed, but at least it's progress.
You know what? I have a friends in the UK, and when there was a Nabu and SAP corruption scandals in Ukraine during last summer, they were not asking me for months, how am I living here, after any deadly attack happening in Ukrainian capital. But once scandal happened, they all sent me the articles about the scandal, like, look, you have this in your country. And I was surprised. That's how people may react on your country. Caolan, as I said at the beginning, that we're talking about a lot of private things, I would say. So you are in your sobriety way of living for the last months.
Yeah.
Why did you choose that path?
I guess the industry that I'm in, war corresponding, is difficult and it's really hard. And almost every seasoned war correspondent that I know that has covered many, many, many wars usually will need something to help them cope with what they've seen, with what they've been through. And a lot of the time that can be alcohol, a lot of the time. And what I noticed is, and this is my first time talking about this, so it feels pretty vulnerable, but you're the only person I think that this would be possible to talk to about, because we spoke about this privately a while ago, is every single time I came back from a really hardcore trip, like Kupiansk, or when I went inside Russia, or I went to Sumy, and usually people that I met or know might have died recently afterwards, or when I was under fire or something really dark was happening, I'd come back to Kyiv and I'd drink alcohol a lot. And that was because that's what a lot of my colleagues did. That's what I saw as a coping mechanism that a lot of journalists did. And there's also a kind of a bit of a glamorization with it, right? In a lot of bars in Beirut and in Kyiv during the full scale, and all these different capitals, or in the embassies, there's this thing of, you know, people smoking, drinking to cope, and typing on their laptops. But after a while, I realized that I want to do this for the rest of my life, and I want to do this journalism the way I've been doing it, and real reporting on a much bigger scale, and I want to do it properly. And I think the only way to get things properly right is to be sober, in all honesty. You know, I'm not talking about entertainment, I'm not talking about sport, I'm talking about people's lives, I'm talking about war, one of the most serious things in the world. And I want to make sure I'm 100% of the time with my reporting. And so I decided after Christmas that I was going to be fully sober and, you know, fully give up drinking, which has been the best thing I've ever done in my life. I mean, it's a little boring every now and then because, you know, all the journalists I know drink quite heavily, and that's what the whole environment is about.
Not all journalists, you know.
Not all, but a lot of the
yeah, but
foreigner.
I'm not the frontline journalist, to be honest. So
yeah,
I never was.
But it was really hard because you know, alcohol has always been something that I've depended on whenever I've been stressed.
Well, it's connecting, yeah, socially connecting people, true.
Yeah, and one of the main reasons that I decided to do this as well is I have hundreds of questions all the time in my forums, in my DMs, from young journalists that want to come here, inspired by what I'm doing. There are already people in Kyiv who moved here specifically because they were inspired by my reporting. And I want to be able to give them advice. And my number one piece of advice is do it well and do it sober, because that is the only obstacle to, I think, messing things up, to being hazy, to waking up foggy, to not being able to get things exactly right. And I think you've got to be, especially in such a serious industry, the best version of yourself at all times. B, anything can happen as well. If a missile strike happens and you need to go and report, you can't be hungover, you can't be in a fog, in a daze, and you've got to have your shit together, honestly. And alcohol stops you having your shit together. So it was the best decision of my life. You know, I'll probably never drink again, but it was really hard. It was really hard because when I go to the front lines, when I go to these places, it's incredibly stressful. Even in Kherson, every night, and I stay in the city center where there's heavy bombardment, I would usually have a couple of swigs of cognac to help me sleep, something like this. This is very, very normal. And I know that I can't do any of those things again. But I'm not here to, this is what I say to correspondents, you're not here to drink, and you're not here to you know, hang out. You're here to tell the most important story in the world.
But how are you coping now after a heavy trip to the east of Ukraine, to the south, or how are you coping after a very heavy night, after a night of Russian rockets flying over Ukraine?
You know, I think I've got used to hearing the sounds of drones. I've got used to hearing the sounds of missiles. It doesn't faze me anymore. And I think so many Ukrainians have as well. So many people who have lived here who are non-Ukrainians have as well. So this doesn't really have an effect on me anymore. Going back to the front, which I'll be doing, I'm going to go to Nikopol in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be traveling a lot more very soon. Will be interesting. It'll probably be a little bit more scary, but I also love to challenge myself in so many ways. I love to push myself. Every film I make, I want the next one to be better, more informative, more interesting, more beautifully filmed. And the next challenge is I want to go and do something like that and tell that story without relying on anything at all, and to do it sober. It's scary and frightening, but I love a challenge, and I love to try to push myself, because I want to look back and say, if I could do all of that and do it without any help, do it sober, I'll be so proud of myself. And I think it also sets a good standard, right? I think I've seen PTSD here with so many people, journalists, volunteers, so many different people, and people who have done everything they can to help Ukraine and do amazing things here, who have slowly destroyed themselves by drinking to cope. And, you know, it's really hard to watch, and it's really hard to see, but it's so easy to do. But I think this is the next chapter in my life now, to really embrace this. And I want to stand on stage one day at an awards ceremony for some journalism awards, telling thousands of young people, is do it sober, do it the best you can, do the best job you possibly can with it, because you're handling something that's so important. It's the story of people's lives. And I think that's something that I want to be able to look back on and say, you know. Also, I look a lot better, which is great. I mean, you're on camera, right? You need to look healthy. You need to look like, there is a big part to this. We both know this. And no one really talks about this in news, but it's like, appearance is very important. When I was first in Ukraine, I used to use filters in all my videos. Yeah. If you look at my old TikToks, you know, I look like a cartoon in some of these videos. And that's because I was exhausted. Sometimes I would be hungover after a really long trip and I was coping, or I just wasn't looking after myself. I wasn't eating properly. And that is not something that's sustainable. Now I don't use filters for anything anymore. And I'm super proud of that as well. And I know that sounds like a silly thing, but it's kind of a big achievement. Because if you're getting your news from someone's face talking, telling you something that's happening, subconsciously you're giving off lots of signals and messages, right? And if you look like someone who's haggard, or who's not well, or who's exhausted, or who's distracted with substance or something, then you're not giving off a vibe of someone that's trustworthy or someone that's reliable for good news and information. So honestly, if you're a journalist and you're on camera and you want advice as well with this, I would say you need to look your best, you need to dress properly, you need to look like you take care of yourself, and you need to have good quality skin, you need to have lots of sleep, you need to be sober. So these things sound arbitrary, but honestly, it's actually really important. I've seen a lot of journalists in lots of different countries who are on the front line filming themselves, and they don't quite look together. And I do think it's really important to look after yourself and to appear as someone that has their shit together. So I'm talking about it now because I know that there are people that'll listen to this who are just arriving here or in another country, maybe at war, and who might want to know how to do it. And I want to say that.
Yeah, this is also part of it, as a part of all the process. Caolan, that was very honest. That was very honest, and I think this is our chapter 1 in having such interviews and conversations with you. So I think at this time, in this video, people will open another side of Caolan Robertson. Vulnerable, honest, with principles, with its own sins and achievements. So for now, I think we unpacked a lot. So thank you for that.